Hi, so I'm going to show you a unit that I planned using the UDL framework. This is just one example of how I implement UDL into teaching with technology and you'll notice as I work through this unit that there are 10 different activities and most of them tap into more than one segment of the UDL sequence. It's not linear in that you do engagement, then action, then representation, and then action expression individually, but instead I start out with a heavy amount of engagement, work through and circle through all three of these and spiral until at the end, I end up with a large amount of action and expression. So the first activity is what is most important to you. This is a Jamboard where students work to express themselves and show what was most important to them. This is a brainstorming activity. And you can see that there is different ways that students used the bits to express themselves in this example. So the very first activity taps into engagement. We had a class discussion about how they responded. And it taps into action and expression because there's no wrong answers there. But the class discussion allows them to express their understanding in different ways. The next thing we did was watch this deep water documentary, and that taps into all three parts of UDL. This is big on engagement. This is the why are we learning this unit of study. This is a course that's about water quality. So this deep water documentary shows the history on the engineering of the New York City watershed reservoir system. And so it's a place-based unit. So it really taps into where we are, and engagement is high in the beginning of the unit. Also, multiple means of representation in that students watch the video, and then in terms of action and expression, they had to answer some guiding questions as we watched, so that they could see what the learning goals were. We then had a class discussion, and I called on students to answer certain guiding questions and give their opinions on what they had viewed. The next thing that we watched was this Billion Gallons a Day. So this is another movie, and this is fairly short. So that taps into engagement and representation again, showing visuals. There's a lot of vocabulary in this activity. The next thing that we examined was this map of the New York City watershed system, and we had a brief discussion about where we were. This tapped into multiple means of representation, and it circled back in terms of engagement for the documentary that we had seen. We learned about these areas, so then we looked at this map. We then went through a few different science in the news. You'll see 3 of these in the unit. And science in the news taps into engagement. Students first all read the same article, and then recorded a video in a discussion on their interpretation of that article. And then in the second one, they were able to find their own articles. So that really taps into action and expression. And in the third science in the news, they were tasked with finding their own videos, which taps into representation as well as action and expression. And since students are engaged in this unit, and they understand why they're learning about the New York City watershed and the water delivery system, they buy in more into science in the news and their ability to switch up in terms of action and expression, their ability to choose their article and their video once the foundation is laid, allows for them to tap into what is most important to them. So that's science in the news. You'll see also discussion posts. Discussion 2 is access to water, human right. So students had a dialogue here, and this shows different forms of representation. That dialogue was in text, so students were able to also, in terms of action and expression, express themselves by writing, and they were also asked to find outside sources that they had to read. Here's our discussion 3, and discussion 3 was about finding their water supplier for their home. So students used a website, which taps into their different representation, the ability to find on a map, and also use different databases, as well as their ability to have action and expression tapped into, where they had a class discussion via text, where they typed out should people need to pay to have access to clean drinking water. So lots of different pieces here. All right, so next up we went into watershed basics. And watershed basics is where we start to spiral away from engagement, because at this point in the unit, by the time we get to the 8th activity, students should understand by this time why we are learning about this material. And so these focus more on representation as well as access and expression. So Freshwater Live is a video, a PSA, that we watch to learn more about the watershed and the parts of the watershed. And then Groundwater is a website that actually teaches material, shows pictures, has a lot of text-based information. So that taps into really representation in a different way. And then this Drink Your Trees presentation is a recorded Zoom presentation that's given by a different instructor than myself, where I was able to show students different information in a presentation format. So that taps into action and expression. And the last 2 pieces of this unit were the Unit 1 vocabulary hunt and the Unit 1 final project. So the vocabulary hunt taps into representation as well as action and expression. So here, students were asked to complete a chart of vocabulary terms, and they were also asked to find a visual representation for each of those terms. So their representation was chosen by them, and there is both text as well as visuals that go along with each of these vocabulary terms. As you can see, this is one example of a student's final submission, and there's a table, there's text, and there are also pictures. So this is being represented in multiple ways, and all the students ended up with different pictures and slightly different definitions, so they were able to really tap into the action expression part of their brain. So that strategic network is really being activated at the end of the unit. Once students already have activated their affective network, they're curious. They've activated their recognition network, how they're going to integrate all of this information. Then we're activating their strategic network. How are they going to prove that they know the material that we are asking them to learn. And lastly, this culminates in a Unit 1 final project where we go away from having high-tech activities. You'll notice many videos, online discussion posts. Students were asked to record videos in terms of explaining their science in the news choices. And they were doing online research. And the Jamboard itself even is a technology tool that was used for engagement. So the very last culminating activity here is for students to do a project where they build a model watershed. So this turns out to be a very low-tech activity all the way at the end. And so for this activity, it's all about action and expression. It's about culminating everything that they've learned and really tapping into that strategic network and putting those pieces together. So they're given a rubric, and the terms that were in the vocabulary hunt circle back and all must be included in their model. And it's about a third of the grade for the model. And about 10% of it is actually based on their presentation, their ability to verbally explain and show how their model proves their understanding of the material. And lastly, one of the most important pieces of this culminating unit is a feedback survey using Google Forms in order to collect data on student learning. This metacognition and their ability to reflect back on their learning and find evidence for their learning is crucial in their ability to activate that strategic network, their action and expression piece of UDL. So I even go through, and in this one question is, the unit followed the following order. How would you change things? Did you like this order? How would you change things? So asking the students, were you successful in learning? And having them actually prove that they were successful in their learning is another key piece that I add to the end of all of my units.